department in Parliament and also the delegation from Umalusi. Chair, I move to adopt the agenda as it is, and also note that, Chair, I'm on the road to the airport.
Okay. Any seconder?
I might have some time.
No, it's fine. Who is seconding now? Morotsetla or Litsia?
Suela. Yeah, it's me.
Oh, Suela.
No, Suela is fainting. I'm not fainting. I'm there for seconding.
Whatever. We have seconded. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, honorable members, for adopting the agenda. Now, DG Ukona.
My apologies, Chair. I just got a message that the DG will be joining us a bit later, Chair, because he's finishing up a meeting with AXA.
Oh, okay.
But he will be joining us, Chair. Thank you.
All right. Now, who is leading the department now from DBE? Do we have somebody?
Good morning, Honorable Chairperson, and good morning, everyone on the call. In the call, we've got Dr. Paulia.
Good morning to the members of the Portfolio Committee. Rufus Paulia here in the absence of the
I know, why is everybody's network bad? Okay. Thank you to both of you, Mr. Mahada and Minister and Dr. Paulia. Thank you very much. We probably have to welcome Umalusi then and congratulate you for your anniversary. They've just turned 20 years of existence. And with that, we recently also had a farewell of the chair, Prof. Doc, it's Prof. I forgot now. Prof. Volming.
Professor Ballum.
Prof. No, Prof. Ballum. I'm saying Prof. Volming.
Prof.
We just
Volming.
said a farewell.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, we just had a farewell of Prof. Volming, and we are wishing him well as the Portfolio Committee on Basic Education. And like we said, on that note, also, we are welcoming you, Prof. Balim. We are welcoming you as an oversight section of the sector. And at a personal level, I know you. I know that when Solprach University started, you are the one that have been there, holding the fort, making sure that it functions very well. I know that you sacrificed your family in Gauteng. You went to the Northern Cape. I was in the province then, and one happened to notice your work, and which we've seen moving. I think now the university is doing very well. I think they are now doing the postgrad qualifications as well. So you know, I know that you will be able to handle Umalusi very well, based on your background and also the type of persona that one has at least managed to get close and watch at a closer space. CEO, we don't know what to say, our doctoral committee. I think all of us here in this committee, except for few, our certificates were signed by yourself. You've been part of the furniture, you've carried this Umalusi for so many years with dignity. It's Umalusi that has made sure it produces quality for our country. It's Umalusi with no scandals. it's Umalusi that made sure that we have certificates, and the certificate that we continuously need. You know, whatever that you do, you apply for a job, a certificate that you must first produce. Mine very confidently is signed by yourself, Doc. Little did I know that I would work and oversight you one day. That's how quick life moves. Congratulations, and we know that you are a team of very committed and highly qualified and educated individuals. You are a cream of our country. You have produced many people to be also creams of this country. We are wishing you well. We want to see many 20 years to come, and holding your flag very high as the entity, but holding the name of our country very high as well, because you produce one of the most certificates in this, for this country and in this country. I am now, can I hand over to you, Dr. Polia? Do you have anything to say?
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning to the honorable members. Apologies for our DG who will be joining us shortly. And my apologies as well. I'm driving, but I will be at my destination in the next few minutes. I think, Honorable Chairperson, you are absolutely correct in terms of your sentiments relating to Umalusi. We depend on them for quality and integrity of the flagship program of this country, which is the NSC. And they've certainly done a sterling job over the last 20 years. And these are certainly the sentiments shared by the Minister, our Deputy Minister, our DG, and the entire education fraternity. And I think this morning, we are going to once again receive another important report, which will once again attest to the standards, credibility, and the international comparability of our National Senior Certificate. We live in a global society, and therefore we want to continuously that are internationally comparable, internationally relevant, and Umalusi has done this job extremely well. And this external evaluation of the NSC, comparing our NSC to 5 other countries, I think is a report which will certainly not only attest to what our current standards are, but will also assist us in terms of looking at where we could improve so that we are in keeping with new developments that are taking place internationally, so that we could keep abreast in terms of 4IR 21st century skill. So we are all looking forward to this report. And thank you, Honorable Chair, together with the members of the Portfolio Committee, for your continuous guidance, direction, and support. Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Polia. Can I now hand over to you, Prof. Balim?
Certainly, Chair, and thank you very much. Firstly, let me say a few acknowledgements to yourself, the Honorable Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee, Mbingo Gigaba. Thank you also for your very generous comments about Salt Lake University and the work that continues there. And as you acknowledged, I'm pleased to once again be working with, for a few years, a fellow citizen in Kimberley. To the honorable members of the Portfolio Committee, my warm greetings and good morning. Please allow me to start by introducing the Umalusi delegation. With me this morning is, firstly, I am Professor Yunus Balam. I'm chairperson of the Umalusi Council. With me is Dr. Mafu Rakumetsi, who is the CEO of Umalusi, Mr. Emmanuel Sibanda, who is Executive Manager Qualifications and Research at Umalusi, Ms. Zodwa Morimakwane, who is Executive Manager Quality Assurance and Monitoring at Umalusi, and then Mr. Ib Diploma, who is the Senior Manager for Statistical Information and Research. We're grateful for the opportunity to present the Portfolio Committee the research findings of the study that Umalusi has just concluded, titled International Benchmarking of the NSC against 5 qualifications. This is particularly an honor for me as chairperson, because this is my first engagement as the chair of Umalusi Council with the Portfolio Committee on Basic Education. This research report coincides with the 20th anniversary of Umalusi this year, as the chairperson has mentioned. This was celebrated recently at the CSR on the 6th of September, where about 180 delegates were in attendance, including the Minister of Basic Education, Honorable Moshecha, and Honorable Letsie, who represented both this portfolio committee and that of Higher Education, Science and Innovation, and other key education stakeholders who were in attendance. We thank the 2 portfolio committees for celebrating the event with us. And although we were sorry that the chairperson, Mayor Mbingo Gigaba, was not able to join us, we were pleased that she attended the earlier farewell event of the outgoing Council of Umalusi. Chair, on the matter in hand today, the General and Further Education and Training Quality Assurance Act, commonly referred to as GenFETCO Act 58 of 2001, as amended, assigns to Umalusi the responsibility to conduct and commission research on issues of importance to the development and implementation of its qualifications sub-framework. It is important to Umalusi that research-based evidence underpins the advice that we give to the Minister of Basic Education. It is equally important to Umalusi that we sustain the confidence of all South Africans in the quality and standing of the qualifications that fall within the purview of Umalusi's mandate. Through the benchmarking study that we share with the Portfolio Committee today, Umalusi aims to fulfill both its research mandate and its commitment to ensuring that our citizens receive internationally comparable levels of education, in the present case with the National Senior Certificate qualification. I will now hand over to Dr. Rakumetsi to lead the presentation. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Balim. Mr. Reporter, you can fly the presentation. Honorable Chairperson, honorable members of the Portfolio Committee on Basic Education, Chairperson of Council, Professor Eunice Balim, Dr. Rufus Polia, appearing on behalf of DG Mweli, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. We have welcomed the new council. We had the first council meeting last week. The arrival of the new council coincides with the celebrations of the 20th anniversary of Umalusi. We had the first council meeting last week, and we're grateful to the minister for the caliber of men and women that she has appointed to serve in the Umalusi Council for the next 4 years. Chairperson, I want to reassure you that we are in the right hands with Professor Balim and the team of men and women who have been appointed to our council. Let me also thank you, Chairperson, before we get into the presentation, for the kind words about Umalusi and its leadership. We are not going to be complacent. You know, in my culture, if you get accolades whilst you are still alive, you can become big-headed and steer off the course. We are not going to do that. We are going to stay focused and work hard for the people of South Africa. We are going to be presenting the international benchmarking of the NSC against selected qualifications. This presentation is structured in the following manner. We are going to share with the members of the Portfolio Committee how we have disseminated the report to date. We are going to look briefly at the organization that was commissioned to do the research, ACTIS, what the purpose of the research was, how the questions were framed, the selected qualifications and subjects. Qualification and subject aspects are going to be compared, and we're going to look at the source materials, and we're going to look at the qualifications context. Then we'll go to the research findings and the recommendations. To date, the research findings and recommendations have been shared with the Umalusi Research Forum, and the date is given when that happened. We shared it with the DG of the Department of Basic Education, together with the members of the senior management of the department. The DG then advised that we should share the report with the Minister and the Deputy Minister of Basic Education. That was done on the 27th of July. We also had the opportunity of presenting to HEADCOM. We had the opportunity of also presenting to the social cluster on the 30th of August. We are now meeting the Portfolio Committee on Basic Education. It is on the 13th of September. We're going to present the findings and the report to you, and we are grateful for the opportunity. We still have to see the Council of Education Ministers on a date to be determined. We are going to launch the report to all South Africans on the 23rd of September at the CSIR 2022. Now, about the body that was commissioned to do the research. The body that was commissioned to do the research is ACTIS, formerly known as UK NARIC. It undertook the research on our behalf. UK NARIC recognition agency function had to change from a NARIC, which is an EU-only title, to an ENIC after the UK's departure from the European Union. Now, ACTIS provides official UK national agency services on behalf of the UK government in qualification, skills, and migration. It is a gold standard provider of solutions and services in international education, training and skills, and in the development and recognition of globally portable qualifications. Our qualification is globally portable. Our children are competing in the global village. ACTIS is an internationally trusted and respected reference point for qualifications and skill standards. It works with universities, organizations, and employers. It has access to the world's largest data bank of information about international education. Maybe about the purpose of the research. The purpose of the current study is to understand the standing of the NSC in relation to similar qualifications from 5 other jurisdictions. This is 12 years after a similar research was conducted by Umalusi in 2010 in collaboration with Higher Education South Africa, HISA, now known as USAF. We partnered with USAF in 2010, and we felt now that it is 2022, that research is a bit old, we need to refresh and have a fresh research. The framing of questions checked to what degree is the NSC comparable to 5 selected qualifications in terms of specific dimensions. What differences and similarities are noticeable at the level of subject curriculum? In relation to assessment methods, what similarities and differences are there between the NSC and other qualifications? The NSC is benchmarked against 5 international qualifications. the International Baccalaureate Diploma Program, IBDP, which is offered all over the world, not in one country. The Kenyan Certificate of Secondary Education, offered in Kenya. The New South Wales Higher School Certificate, which is offered in Australia, in a state in Australia. I must indicate that the New South Wales replaced Ghana Senior Secondary School Certificate because Ghana was not forthcoming in terms of providing us with documentation and consent to look at their qualification against ours. So when they were experiencing those delays, we had to remove Ghana from our plans. We then had Zimbabwean Forms 5 to 6 advanced level offered by ZIMSEC. And then we've got the Cambridge Assessment International Education, AS and A levels, offered not in one country, but in a number of jurisdictions. The following 5 subjects were selected. They were English first additional language. The logic behind that is that most learners take English first additional language in South Africa. The other subject is geography, life sciences, which is called biology in other jurisdictions, mathematics, and physical sciences. I'm going to hand over to Mr. Bikili Porter to proceed with the presentation by giving us the details of the presentation and also why we chose those countries. Biki, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Agumezi. Let me begin by greeting the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee, as well as all the honorable members in the meeting, as well as our chairperson, Professor Balim, and the Umalusi colleagues. In terms of the reasoning or the rationale behind the selection, we looked at 2 or 3 things. Firstly, we needed the benchmarking to be done in both well-established countries and countries of comparable economic status in the region as well as abroad. At the regional level, we looked at Kenya, which is in East Africa. We needed to look at West Africa. That's why the CEO said we needed to look at Ghana, but for unforeseeable reasons, we've had to make a change in that regard. And we also looked at what is happening in Zimbabwe. Outside of our continent, we went to the New South Wales, the higher school certificate, which replaced Ghana. We also looked at the IBDP as well as the CIE, which are the IBDP and the CIE are qualifications or programs which are offered all over the world. Now, the next question is what method was used in conducting the benchmarking study? This study was conducted in 3 ways. The first way was for the service provider to do what we call a qualification review for each of the selected qualifications. And this involved identification and analyzing critically each of the qualifications score components and the underpinning quality assurance mechanisms. So that was the first step. And once this was done, they then moved on to stage number 2, during which they did what we call comparative analysis. They did a detailed analysis of the core components identified in stage number 1 against suitable specific dimensions. And then the final step was for the service provider to do what we call evaluation and benchmarking, during which stage the service provider drew together the key findings of steps number 1 and step number 2 above in order to determine the overall level of comparability of the qualifications in the context of the selected comparison points. So this was the methodology. It was a 3-step approach employed. Now, focusing on the dimensions that the service provider focused on when they looked at the qualification, they looked at 6 things. Firstly, they looked at comparability of entry requirements. Secondly, they looked at the duration that students take in order to successfully complete the qualification. Thirdly, they looked at how the qualification is structured and what its contents are. And fourthly, they looked at the modes of learning. And fifthly, they had to look at similarities and differences as far as method of assessments are concerned. And then finally, they considered the associated outcomes. This is at the level of qualification. Now, moving on to step number 2, which considered the subject. They compared the subject. There are several dimensions that were considered here too. The first one was the structural features, the subject-specific requirements and the expected prior learning, as well as the duration of the study, and then progression routes. Secondly, they looked at the aims of the subjects, the intentions and purposes of the selected subjects. Thirdly, they considered the learning outcomes, which are the key knowledge, skills, and competencies to be demonstrated by the candidates. At the fourth level, they looked at the themes and the topics that are taught by teachers and learned by the learners. Fifthly, they considered assessment objectives, which are used to identify the knowledge, skills, and competencies that students are assessed on. And then finally, the method of assessments through which both internal and external assessment take place, as well as the weighting of the different examination components, the ratio between internal and external assessments. So this is what was considered as far as the comparability of our subjects is concerned. Moving on, we are now on this slide looking at the policy documents which were consulted in undertaking the study. In our own case, we provided the service provider with the national policy pertaining to the program and promotion requirements of the national curriculum statements for grades R to 12, which is commonly known as the NPPR. We provided the service provider with the national protocols for assessments in grades R to 12. Thirdly, the CAPS documentation in relation to the 5 selected subjects were also made available to the service provider. The 27 examination guidelines, as well as the question papers and associated marking memoranda or guidelines, were also provided to the service provider. So these are the key documents that the service provider considered in the case of the NSC. In the case of the policy documents of the other jurisdictions, we wrote to them so they could provide the service provider with similar documents. Now, on this slide number 10, we are providing to the members of the portfolio committee just a brief context to contextualize the findings emanating from the study. Now, in terms of the subjects and the minimum subject required in order for students to pass the qualification, we begin with the NSC. It is common knowledge that in our own case, we have up to 67 subjects, which subjects are categorized into 8 learning fields. And students require a minimum of 7 subjects. And of those 7 subjects, 4 are compulsory. Compared to the CIE, we learn in that there are 55 courses or subjects on offer. And in this case, the CEO has already indicated that the CIE is offered in plus minus 160 countries. There are no compulsory subjects as far as the CIE is concerned. And what happens is that schools make a decision on subject combinations. While there are no compulsory subjects, there is a common arrangement. And at the AS levels, there are 4 subjects, while at the A level, there are 3 subjects on offer. Moving on to look at the IBDP, there are 6 subject groupings. And what happens is that students are required to take 1 subject from each of the 6 groups. And additional to that, they take 1 compulsory core, which is made up of 3 components. And it's offered like the CIE in many jurisdictions across the world. Moving on to look at what is happening in Kenya, we know that there are 30 subjects on offer, out of which students take between 7 and 9 subjects from a specified groupings. So we are now moving on to look at the New South Wales, where we learned that there are over 100 courses in 10 areas. So they are categorized in terms of areas. And in terms of this minimum subject required, we learned that there are 12 units of preliminary courses, which students take in year number 11. And in the following year, which is year number 12, students take 10 units of courses, and one course is equivalent to 1 or 2 units. And then finally on the slide, looking at what is happening in Zimbabwe, there are 5 pathways of 7 to 10 subjects each. And learners are placed on the program on the basis of the acquired competence. So this is just a brief context that we thought would be useful for the discussion that we are having this morning. Now, on this slide, I think the next couple of slides, we will be looking at what we have learned from the report in terms of the differences and similarities of the NSC relative to the selected qualifications. Firstly, in terms of the entry requirements, the report tells us that there's high level of comparability between the NSC and the other qualifications, the other 3 qualifications, those being the New South Wales qualification, the ZIMSEC, as well as the Kenyan qualifications. And this high degree of comparability is brought in by the fact that students are expected to produce evidence of achievement of up to the previous year of schooling. In contrast, the IB, DP, and the CIE, AS, and A levels do not have strictly listed entry requirements. And this is partly due to their nature as programs, which operate in a wide range of programs, or in a wide range of international contexts. So in short, what distinguishes the IB, DP, and CIE to the NSC and other qualifications, that these are programs, whereas the NSC is a qualification. So that's where we stand relative to the qualifications and program. Moving on to look at the duration, we learned that the IB, the CIE levels, and the New South Wales qualification, together with the ZIMSEC school living programs, are all generally 2 years in duration. So students spend 2 years, and if they are successful, they get awarded with the certificate. Compared to our own situation, we know that the NSC is a 3-year qualification beginning in grade 10 and then ending in grade 12. So it has 1 year longer duration than the majority of the comparator programs. However, the report says, when considered as a component of the full number of years of schooling, all systems are comparable. So that is the finding as far as the duration is concerned. We are now on this slide focusing on the differences and similarities in terms of the structure of the qualifications. And in this regard, we learned that the NSC aligns most closely with the subjects studied at the standard level of the Ib Diploma Program. Relative to the higher level subjects, the report tells us that some of those subjects' details and complexity place the IB award at a slightly higher overall level. So in other words, the NSC sits somewhere in between the standard and the higher level subjects. Compared to the Kenyan school living certificate, the NSC is generally at a higher overall level. However, both the NSC and the KCSE require a comparable number of subjects and have some elements of compulsory subject selection in relation to languages and mathematics, and they build on a similar number of years of prior learning. Now, looking at ourselves relative to the ZIMSEC qualifications, Form 5 and 6, we learned that the NSC has comparable entry requirements, but many structural differences. That the ZIMSEC qualification is a single subject style qualification, which involves 2 years of study in comparison with the NSC's 3 years. So that's how we compare. Looking at ourselves in relation to the New South Wales qualification, the NSC has a comparable number of subjects and a similar number of years of schooling, but the New South Wales qualification has 2 years duration compared to the NSC's 3 years FET phase. And finally, relative to the NSC, the CIE is a single subject style of the AS and the A levels, which leads students to a typically narrower subject range, which is counterbalanced by further depth and or complexity or extra content breadth within each subject that is studied. We just need to remind each other here that unlike the NSC, there are no compulsory subjects here. So that is how the NSC compares with the selected qualifications at the level of a qualification. Now, these slides and 3 more to come focus on the subject specifications. We begin with the number of subjects, and the report tells us that there's variability between the different programs in terms of the number of subjects. The NSC 7-subject minimum is similar to the pattern of study in the IB Diploma Program, the New South Wales and the Kenyan School Leaving Certificate. The exception here is the ZIMSEC qualification. As far as the compulsory subjects are concerned, the NSC is the most prescriptive, so says the report, because it has 4 most compulsory subjects, 2 of which are languages, 1 at home language level and the other at first additional language level. And this, one of the 2 must be English. The second is life orientation, and the last is maths and or mathematical literacy. The Kenyan School Leaving qualification also prescribes 3 subjects, which subjects are English, Kiswahili, which is a mother tongue, and mathematics. And this prescription is made out of a minimum of 7 subjects. And the New South Wales qualifications prescribes that English be studied. So the only prescription made by the New South Wales qualification is that English should be studied. Moving on to look at the IB Diploma Program, we observe that this has compulsory core elements, but the subjects are guided by a grouping system rather than prescribing specific curricula. So unlike the NSC and the KCSE, the IB Diploma Program does not make a prescription to say you shall study maths, you shall study English. So the grouping system is what guides the subject selection. With regard to the CIE program, the report tells us that the A-level structure underpinning the CIE and the ZIMSEC forgoes compulsory subjects. So in other words, in the CIE and the ZIMSEC system, there is no prescription in terms of which subjects are compulsory. The same is true for the IB Diploma Program. Looking at the aims, outcomes, and study mode, the report tells us that there are considerable similarities between the NSC's aims, learning outcomes, and assessment objectives and those of the other systems, that all analyzed qualifications aim to enable students to progress to either higher or further education or the world of work. So there's a high amount of comparability here between the NSC and the comparator qualifications and or program. Regarding the mode of study, we learned that the NSC is comparable to the other programs. So to summarize, we compare favorably with the other qualifications as far as aims, outcomes, and the study modes are concerned. We are now focusing on the concept called breadth and depth. By breadth, we mean how many knowledge elements are contained in each of the subjects studied, and how deep do we go in teaching those. Now, what we have learned from this report is that the levels of breadth and depth in the NSC are appropriate for a school leaving qualifications. Comparing ourselves with ZIMSEC regarding breadth, the report says except for ZIMSEC, all the qualifications programs emphasize breadth in a range of subjects studied. And as far as depth is concerned, the second year of the New South Wales qualification and the CIE, together with ZIMSEC's, form 6 subjects, and the International Baccalaureate Diploma Program's higher level options, they showed either more depth or complexity of content in some areas when compared to the comparator NSC subjects. The A-level structure that underpins the CIE and ZIMSEX programs emphasize depth in a smaller number of subjects in comparison with the other programs. We are now moving on to look at how the knowledge elements are sequenced and paced. Let's say we have 10 knowledge elements to be covered as far as mathematics is concerned. The question here is, how do we sequence them and how do we pace ourselves? The report says the NSC's approach of giving guidance on the sequencing and pacing of content appears to be more prescriptive than all other comparator qualifications. And according to the report, this prescriptive approach appears to be motivated by the need to provide uniform student experiences rather than enabling teacher flexibility. So that is a finding with regard to sequencing and pacing. Chair and members of the portfolio committee, we are now going to be looking at what we have learned as far as methods of assessment are concerned. And in this case, we learned that the Nss's assessment methods have more similarities with the approaches deployed by other comparison programs. Firstly, we learned that the fixed ratio of SBA and external components across all subjects is more similar to the Nss's New South Wales qualification approach. What the report tells us is that the Kenyan qualifications and the CIE programs do not include internal assessment for English and mathematics. In other words, English and mathematics do not have schoolwork that contributes towards the final mark. Regarding the New South Wales qualification, what makes it different to the NSC is that the split, the ratio of internal to external assessment is 50-50. So 50 marks that are acquired during the year contribute, sorry, not 50 marks, 50% of the marks acquired during the year contribute half of the final mark. The approaches to marking formal assessment in the NSC are closely matched with programs such as the CIE, AS and the A levels, the IB Diploma Program, and the New South Wales qualification. The IBDP does not allow calculators in external examinations for maths. So this is something that distinguishes the IBDP from the rest of the qualifications. Now I will focus on what we have learned from the study as far as the subject level findings are concerned. And we start with English and geography. Regarding English, the NSC has much in common with other curricula that teach English as a second or as an additional language. While the curriculum framework uses different language modalities of speaking, of listening, reading, and writing as a structure, the report tells us that this is appropriate for an additional language curriculum. So the way we teach English, or we approach the teaching of English, is highly comparable with what is happening elsewhere in the world. Looking at geography, the NSC is an effectively structured and designed curriculum. It has many similarities with others in terms of aims, intended learning outcomes, and assessment approaches. The differences reflected the very national regional foci in terms of what content is prioritized in a geography curriculum. So here context does matter, to state it differently. Looking at our own maths relative to maths from other jurisdictions, the report says all curricula have substantial similarities at the level of intended learning outcomes and assessment methods. On the other hand, all the curricula show differences in emphasis on certain topics. And in this regard, the report says the NSC shows less emphasis on the topic of mechanics and the use of technology, and it shows more emphasis on spatial skills than the other qualifications. So that is what makes us differ with the other qualifications. Regarding life sciences, the report says the NSC has many similarities with the learning outcomes and assessment objectives of biology curriculum in comparison with the other programs. At the same time, the NSC is the only qualification to cover a history of life on Earth as one of its topics in life sciences. Like the Kenyan and New South Wales qualification, the NSC does not cover statistical methods as a knowledge area. Some content priority differences were identified in the study, particularly where certain comparison curricula have greater focus on mathematical skills than the NSC life sciences. And finally, on this slide, regarding physical sciences, while the NSC combines the content of physics and chemistry, these are generally distinct subjects in other systems. So you have this in as separate subjects. The unique feature of the NSC is its heliquetal approach. By heliquetal, it's meant that the same topic is covered across the different grades. And the difference is that as you go higher up the ladder, the topic is covered in greater depth and complexity. Similar assessment methods are used across the comparison points in these subjects, though some provide a slightly more rigorous test of higher order skills than the NSC curriculum. So those are the similarities and differences as far as the subjects are concerned. Now, this slide is intended just to summarize what we have learned up to so far. Firstly, the IB Diploma Program and the CIE-AS levels, they have no entry requirements. The NSC has longer duration than others and the most compulsory subjects. The NSC is the strictest in terms of prescribing what is taught, in what sequence that is taught, and within exactly what time frame. Some indications of greater depth and complexity of subject content were observed in some aspects of other programs in comparison with the NSC. The IB Diploma Program and the Kenyan qualifications have a predefined assessment criteria, which is called criterion reference approach, as opposed to our norm reference approach. Regarding mathematics, we have learned that it has less emphasis on topics of mechanics and use of technology. Life sciences has less emphasis on mathematical skills, and physical sciences is the only subject to combine chemistry and physics. So that is just to summarize what we have learned. Now, the next couple of slides will focus on what recommendations come out of the study on the basis of the findings. The first one relates to standardization in terms of articulation of aims, learning outcomes, and the relationship between this and the key skills. And the key skills that are singled out in the report are literacy and numeracy, lifelong learning, ICT skills, flexibility and adaptability, and project skills that students should develop. The structure of how the areas of cognitive demand are presented may be helpful to certain stakeholders who teach or learn more than one subject and therefore use multiple subject guides to understand the NSC curriculum. So this does call for uniformity in terms of the stipulation of the weighting of the cognitive demand across cognate subjects. On this slide, we just emphasizing the same point we've made on the previous slides, but slightly different. These are currently not explicitly stated as outcomes in the subjects that were considered. Regarding subject-specific recommendations, we begin with geography. The report says it is worth considering whether some topics could be updated in relation to their reference to scholarship or models of geographic thinking. Some of the urban models, such as the Harris and Ullman, have been a little overtaken by modern urbanization trends, and globalization has also changed the dynamics of trade with regard to terms such as break of bulk points. Moving on to maths, we learned that alternative programs demonstrate a greater emphasis than the NSC on the development of ICT skills as a learning outcome, specifically linked to the study of maths. So that is what has been learned. Life sciences, where some programs demonstrate a greater emphasis on the skill of maths within the field of biology than the NSC life sciences. The question is whether this skill should be given priority or not, considering our own context. And regarding physical science, it is worth rethinking the packaging of the subject. Chemistry and physics are two distinct subjects in other jurisdictions compared to in our own case where these are combined in one to make one subject. Now, the question is whether if we want to rethink that, what are the implications in terms of the resources? Now, this is the point, Chair, where I need to hand back to the CEO to conclude the discussion. Dr. Rakometsi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lepotan. Chairperson, honorable members, in conclusion, there is something that we need to emphasize, and that is that as South Africa, we've got our own history and we've got our own context, so that what flourishes in the education system elsewhere may be good and may thrive in that area, but it may not thrive in our context because of our history. We've got our own unique history, we've got our own unique context. As a student at varsity doing education, way back then, we used to do a module called Comparative Education. Comparative Education. This module was warning that when we compare education systems, you should not think that what applies and thrives in another jurisdiction will necessarily thrive in your own jurisdiction. And we later on use the flower metaphor, where we look at the flowers, and they will come up later on, where we look at the flowers in Kenya, in Zimbabwe, and in other jurisdictions that we have looked at. And we are saying they are beautiful there where they are. But because of the soil type that we have in South Africa, because of the weather conditions that we have in South Africa, what looks good in another jurisdiction may not necessarily be good in our context. What this calls for is that, having done the comparative study, our qualifications and curriculum experts have to look at what we have and say, will what we have learned in other jurisdictions work in South Africa? Some of the comparison points are qualifications and some are programs. The IB and International Baccalaureate and the CIE are programs. And we're talking here about a qualification in the context of South Africa. There are also differences in terms of the purpose of the qualification and the program. For instance, we have to look at what the NSC purpose is. For instance, I want to make a point that the NSC is not only leading students to university, it leads students to the world of work. It is also a qualification that is used by people who just want to understand how the country operates. So it has got a multifaceted kind of purpose. So when you look at what is good in another jurisdiction, you must also check what the purpose of that qualification is. The systems also differ with regards to the number of schooling years. You have noted that with ZIMSEC also having 13 years of schooling, where we have only 12 years of schooling. The qualifications and programs differ in relation to the number of subjects and their packaging. And I want to make another point here and say, you might have noticed that in one of the jurisdictions that Mr. Leport has been talking to, mathematics has got technology and mechanics. And our mathematics does not have that. What this means, because of the broad scope of our subjects, technology in South Africa is taken care of in ICT, which is a standalone subject. But in another jurisdiction, it is part of mathematics. Mechanics, we've got technology in one of the subjects that we have in curriculum. So it is not catered for in mathematics. In life sciences, for instance, in one of the jurisdictions I observed that they've got statistical methods. Statistical methods in the context of South Africa will be accommodated elsewhere. So we have to bear all this in mind. Based on these, some aspects which may have been found to be lacking in some of the NSC subjects considered in the study may be covered in other subjects which were not part of the study. That is very important. You are using a flower metaphor in the next slide to say, in South Africa, Vicky, we've got the protea. The protea thrives in our weather conditions. It thrives in the South African soil. The blood lily thrives in Kenya, flame lily in Zimbabwe. I may like the flame lily, But will it thrive if I were to transplant it to South Africa? And vice versa. If, for instance, the Zimbabweans may like the Protea, will it really work in their context? Looking at their history, looking at the contextual differences. So we go on and on with that and say, as we do comparison, we have to be careful what we bring over and what we don't bring over. Biggie, next slide. We still indicate in all our presentations throughout the year that we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of Umalusi under the theme 2 decades of education guardianship. This slide is part of our celebration that will be flighting wherever we go on our advocacy with the interactions that we have with our stakeholders. At that point, Chair, I want to pause and hand over the meeting back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doc. Siyabonga, members, that is the presentation. Yeah, no, from Umalusi. Highly what? Highly what is benchmarking, things of educated people of South Africa. I see the hand of no data. Can I note hands from members that would want to partake in the presentation? I also see Honorable Suela. In that order, no data.
Thank you so much, Chair. I see. This was a very, and thanks to Umalusi. You're losing me, Chair. Let me try.
Proceed now. Looks like you are fine now.
I'm fine. Let me just make sure that I'm fine. Okay, am I audible, Chair?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Thank you so much for the presentation. The very interesting one. I find quite a lot of interest here. Even ourselves, we just recently went to go do a benchmark with 17 other countries in Germany, just from another perspective, Umalusi, and we found that our education system is not as bad as we think it is, but there's quite some few questions that I would like to ask and maybe comment on the chairperson's remarks at the end there that I might disagree with. But I think it's quite important for us to establish that initially the NSC, from grade 10 to 12, the intention or the intended outcome, and Umalusi can correct us here, either the CEO or the chairperson, but the intended outcome there is to prepare mainly learners for university entry. And I hear the chair at the end saying that, the NSC is multifaceted, prepare people for the world of work and so on and so on. And the reality of the situation is that in South Africa, we've got 7 in every 10 young people unemployed, and some of them having qualification in this NSC, some of them even having qualification at a university level. But just to bring it back to this thing of preparing learners for university and looking at our matric examination and how many learners at that particular level between those grades up until matric when they write the matric examination, and how many of them actually get a qualification in terms of bachelor's or even, a national diploma entry in university, you will find that there's a very, very low number or low percentage of learners that actually make it through the system to be able to utilize this NSC qualification to then access a further education and training. And I think there's a failure there, and we need to be asking ourselves the questions, Chair, rather than, being defensive of our environment and, what our qualifications intended for. Because if we're talking about the NSC as an exit level to enter, institutions of higher learning or further education, or even the world of work, and we're not having enough learners, qualifying for a bachelor's or diploma pass, then we need to ask ourselves a question as to where the problem is. And I'm glad that in comparison to other qualifications that you've mentioned, Zimbabwe, Kenya, North, Southwest, Wales, and all the other qualifications that you did mention, that it is quite comparable. But then the outcomes then become questionable, because then are we then achieving the intended purpose of this NSC? And I think that's the main question that must be left with us, particularly the department, as to what exactly can we do to improve that that outcome percentage of learners that go through that particular system of the NSC. And I do think that it's quite largely related to quality teaching, because the curriculum as set out right now is not a bad curriculum. But I do think that if all of these ideas and these recommendations and these studies that we do don't translate to practical action that will tangibly change the outcomes for the better, then we will be failing there. So the question I want to ask, Umalusi, mainly is, what could be the possible reasons that make, the bachelor pass rate so low, to a point where, I think at some point it was 13% only of the whole cohort that wrote the examinations that actually had a bachelor pass, qualification to be able to access university. What would make it so low? Is it maybe our foundation levels that contribute to maybe learners not being able to comprehend that type of standard in the NSC that is required? Is it the quality of teaching? What are the elements? Because that's where we need to look at, so that when we do talk about the NSC qualification and hold and be proud of it, we must be able to make sure that the learner at the end, achieve the outcomes that it's intended for them to access university, the job market, and so on, as the chair was saying. I do think, secondly, there is an effectiveness in terms of some of the compulsory subjects. We're benchmarking, like I was saying, we're benchmarking with other countries, in Europe, in some African countries, some Latin American countries, and so on. But there is an effect in terms of making maths compulsory, the languages compulsory, and then there's an element of what we call life orientations or life skills, or what we call soft skills, if you wanna put it that way, and skills that are outside of the formal learning space. I think it is quite effective to do that. But I do think maybe I would like to get a comment, from Umalusi, in terms of, I know it wasn't benchmarked in this particular study, but in terms of life orientation as a subject that is compulsory, that is supposed to equip learners to be able to get by in our own environment. Like you're saying, it's a here, we in South Africa, there's certain things that learners need to, to kind of know for them to kind of acquire those soft skills. Or is it utilized, for example, for them to use LO as a therapy session to go and see a psychologist? Or can it be used for them to acquire soft life skills in terms of knowing what SARS is, how the system of government work and so on, for them to be able to just operate in life? Is there a need to rejig that so that learners better adapt to our own environment in the country? Or, is the curriculum offering at this point in time, fine as rigid as it is? And the reason why I ask the question is because you'll find that that particular subject, for example, is left, in the hands of, that particular state or province, in our case, and in that particular district or that particular school, to utilize based on the environment, because there's not a protea everywhere. Yes, a protea is a South African flower, but in the Western Cape or in Northern Cape, there's a certain way in which, or in a particular district in the Northern Cape, that there are certain life skills that are required, or soft skills that are required for learners to acquire so that they can get by in life. So the point I'm trying to drive to is that, is there a need for us to decentralize? Because as much as it's good to have those compulsory subjects, right? Is there a need for us to decentralize the manner in which some of the subjects are actually taught? So the pedagogies that are used by teachers, or the use of that particular subject based on that environment, so that we're not so prescriptive to a point whereby now all of us have to go and cram at the end of the 3 years of the NSC, cram for an assessment that is an examination that is designed in a central way, that, in my view, has an element of, you cram, but there is, elements of, are you knowledgeable about the subject? But mainly, largely, it's like a cramming system that is centralized, and, there's no flexibility in terms of how do teachers, teach. There's no flexibility in terms of assessment. How do we best assess so that we don't end up with a 13% cohort of learners that just have a bachelor's pass going to university? And then what do we say about the rest that have been through the system of the NSC? So that's the main question that I have in terms of flexibility, in terms of the curriculum that can be decentralized, but also the assessment methods. Is the examination, the final examination, the only method that we can test knowledge or knowledgeable skills on these subjects that have been indicated? And I think it's something that we need to rethink. And benchmarks like this, requires to rethink. I mean, I was fortunate to meet the professor that leads the TIMS assessments, and he basically said, look, we can do these general TIMS tests, and I can show you the graphs, but because the environments are not the same, they differ. There's nothing we can take away from it. There might be a certain number that we can say internationally they need to meet, but every environment is unique, and you can't judge those outcomes based simply on that. You need to be able to decentralize and go in depth, look at the different assessment methods, look at whether they're professional and knowledge and personal skills that are being developed by those learners. Are you flexible enough in your curriculum to make sure that you achieve the outcomes? Then you won't analyze the wrong assessment to say we've got a matric pass rate of 76, but of this 76%, only 13% of the learners have an access to a bachelor's pass, and the intended requirement for an NSC was for you to access a university. So meaning we're failing in that instance in any ways. So it's just some things that I'd just like to put to Umalusi to maybe respond to. I know some of them, are questions and comments, in between, and I hope you'll be able to answer that. And then I wanted to check in terms of that now that the study, shows that our curriculum is comparable, why does that not reflect in our results? It's comparable, but why doesn't it reflect in our results? You will see, I mean, I've come across a lot of, foreign, people that come from Zimbabwe or Kenya. They easily, enter our economy, then they participate in the economy based on the qualification that they have at that level, which is comparable. But in our own case, with South Africa, we've got such a high unemployment rate. So, as much as we're comparable, why doesn't it reflect in our results, as I've mentioned earlier, but also, the contributing factor of a high unemployment rate? And what could be the possible reasons as to why learners are not university ready, which is linked to the questions, so that I can be very clear about my questions beyond the comments that I've made. And I wanted to check, when you reported to, when you did the report and you presented it to the minister and the deputy minister, and I'm assuming that the department, what is the intended use of DBE? What do they intend to use this report for? Because there's quite a few recommendations. And in the recommendations, I hear the chairperson has rebutted some of them. What is the intended use of this particular report? And it would be interesting, Chair, to actually do a follow-up on this one, because it talks to the core of the reason why, the NSC exists to begin with, but also at the core of our education system, because it's everything that everyone looks forward to in January, the announcement of these results, of matric results, which are the NSC qualification. And it would be interesting to follow what is being done to rejig our curriculum to make sure that at least as much as it's comparable, it then it is effective. We see it in the learners' outcomes, we see it in people actually progressing and not ending up in the unemployment ranks. Because unless the study is followed by effective and efficient action, it will simply, just be, a waste of money. to be honest, Chair. So the last bit of questions that I want to ask that are very specific is that there is that 3-stream curriculum model that I've asked the minister, and I actually commended the minister about 3-stream curriculum model, and I was told that it's going to be updated in the website and all of that. And the 3-stream curriculum model is quite similar to the German system that has 4 components. You know, it's got a qualification that prepares people for university. It's got a qualification that prepares people for TVET colleges, or and then it's got a qualification that prepares people for technical universities. Then it's got a qualification, you know, that simply gives you your basic life skills that you need to go by, a qualification that you need as an education. So with the 3-stream curriculum model, how far is it, and what enhancements is it going to bring to the NSC as a qualification that is intended to, you know, quote the chairperson, equip people for the world of work, but also making sure that there's entry in other institutions of higher learning or further education, if you want to put it that way. And the reason why I asked the question is because maybe it is time that we rethink some of these subjects, Chair, that, you know, do we still put physics and chemistry together? Is there no need for us to make, you know, mathematics much more ICT related, as much as we've got coding and robotics as an element on its own? Is it not high time for us to review the whole curriculum in its own, to trim it and make sure that we focus on depth as indicated, rather than, you know, the quantitative breadth of it? So, you know, these are some of the things that I think we need to think about, and maybe Umalusi can advise as to practically, how do we then go about doing that? Not just for these subjects that have been benchmarked for the NSC, but generally in the NSC qualification, and generally in the system and other qualifications that, I mean, you are responsible of quality assuring, that we actually do develop skills that are relevant, knowledge, you know, professional skills that are going to be used, knowledge, personal skills that people can be able to utilize to participate in the economy, to further their education, to make sure that we get a quality certificate. And in developing teachers, is there mechanisms and mechanism in place to kind of quality assure their qualifications? So if you go to university and say you're going to study an FET subject so that you can be able to become a teacher, is there some form of quality assurance that is linked to the 3-stream curriculum model, or the curriculum as benchmarked here? And these are the things that sometimes hold us back, because then we, you know, teachers just get qualified and then we have to upskill them or professionally develop them. And, you know, there sometimes seems to not be a synergy there, you know, at some point in time. So that's why I asked the question in relation to the 3-stream curriculum model. And the second last one is that there's obviously some subjects that have been excluded in the study. I mean, rightfully so, and we focused on the basics. Is there an intended purpose maybe to do a further dive into them and see the effectiveness, and how do we best make them a bit better to ensure that the effective history, as an example? I know history is used as a weapon in many countries to indoctrinate learners. I mean, even myself here in South Africa, I did history up until matric level, and I feel as if, you know, it was just an indoctrination of a certain side of history. So, you know, is there a way in which we can review some of these subjects to make sure that they're effective and learners can be able to utilize them in the world of work? And then, Chair, there were comments made by the chairperson at the end there, and as much as we do understand that the environment is different and all of that, I don't think we should take best practice, or we should learn from what is good in other countries and try utilize them in South Africa, but utilizing them in a decentralized manner. And this is a conversation that I'll consistently bring up, because I don't believe that education should be a central commodity at a national government level. I do think there's a need for decentralization and giving more power to provinces. And even in other countries, they go as far as a municipal level, where they where it's effective. But even in terms of curriculum setting, where, curriculum is set as a framework at a national level, but in terms of how it's implemented, the pedagogy is used, the mechanisms that are used, like the study has shown now, that it shouldn't be as prescriptive, as it is at the point in time, so that we can make sure that we accommodate those different proteas that exist in our different environments. And I think it's something I want to trigger Umalusi to maybe do a response to, and even DBE to do a response to. I know, Chair, this was long, but it's a subject that I'm really passionate about. And I've got a very keen interest on some specific questions on it. And I can even write some of them to just to make sure that I get the right answers for it in relation to the study. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Suela.
Thank you, Chairperson, and with your permission,
We are manje. Your network is a problem.
I would prefer not to open the. Can you hear me now? Hello.
Proceed.
Oh, okay, Chair. Let me just leave all other things and go straight to the questions before my network distracts me again. Chair, the first question probably that I have is that in relation to the breadth and depth of our NSC system, the finding is that the other systems have more depth or complexity of content. What are the implications in the further education space or higher education? A student from the other system will have more depth of knowledge than our students. The second question is the lack of depth and breadth of our qualification one of the factors contributing to poor adaptation at a university level, resulting to a failure at the higher education level? And lastly, Chair, noting the difference of context in our country, is a prescriptive approach restrictive to the creativity of the teacher and to adapt her pace to her conditions in order to enable learners to grasp the content than galloping based on the prescribed approach? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Suela. There's no other hand, not unless I'm not seeing it.
There is a hand from the principal.
Oh, I did not see your hand, Principal Mara. You can proceed.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Muluda Studio, and everybody on this all-important platform, the platform on the Portfolio Committee on Basic Education. Chair, for a start, let me join those who came before me, but I will add by saying we welcome and appreciate the presentation, of course, as brought to this Portfolio Committee by Umalusi. But we must continue to appreciate the good work, Chair, that Umalusi is doing. They are very consistent in as far as monitoring performance of our education day in and day out. And it's something which we definitely have to put great value on, because without them, we would never know whether we are going or coming. I have got two questions with me here before I come up with some of the recommendations. Chairperson, the role of maths in our education system can never be undermined. And it is about time that without overlooking the role of other subjects, but we must always know that the importance that mathematics is playing is as integral as it is so important to us. Noting that our mathematics in the NSC shows less emphasis on mechanics topics and the use of technology, and more emphasis, instead it shows more emphasis on the spatial skills than some comparison points. What could be the implication of this finding, and does this require some curriculum adaptation going forward to keep it in balance? The second question, do the findings of this study also reflect a need to review all CAPS subjects, noting the gaps identified in the subjects in this study as a way of addressing the dynamic and changing world? And after those questions, Chairperson, can I be allowed to say, on behalf of the portfolio committee, or this portfolio committee, we move or we accept the recommendations of Umalusi as captured in this study? Because by the look of things, if you go to that slide which deals with the recommendations, I think it is taking us many steps forward than remaining in a static position. I'll further recommend that we continue to assess the implementation of this stream model as we undertake a comparison with other global models. Thank you very much, Chairperson, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, our principal. Any other hand? No? From me, slide 16 or page 16 on the aims and outcomes. You are alluding there that there are considerable similarities between the NSC's, aims, the learning outcomes, the assessment objectives, and those of the other systems. Now, my issue, or my question rather, is our pass rate here in the country is 32%. And how is that then compared to other systems? And then on slide 17, the death referred to, does it relate to the depth of content on the NSC or the curriculum coverage? On slide 21, does CIE offer English as additional language, or is it offered as a home language? And then there is KCSE, there's NWS. By the way, there are a lot of acronyms, Doc Rakometsi, a lot of acronyms, and Tina, we are not educated like yourselves there. And then NSC, they don't cover the statistical methods. Now I think that needs to be, I think that needs to be revisited. And I will say why I'm saying so. You know, when you get to a tertiary a level, you then get to be introduced to research. And I don't know with other people, but when you are supposed to deal with issues of data, the statistics, and I mean, those who have done research, it gets to be complicated because you do not have that background of statistics from a high school level. So one just think that we probably need to revisit that. There needs to be something of a data that is done for you also as part of the NSC. But for interest sake, and I know that you have taken few subjects that you came to present to us, but in terms of this presentation, where does the technical maths fit in the whole picture? Because I have not heard any reference of it. And then slide 28, where Dr. Rakometsi started presenting towards the end. Your conclusion, you are affirming that there are historical differences and contextual differences. Yet on slide 16, you have alluded to the similarities. Probably it's me that is reading a contradiction in those statements, but I think you'll be in a better position to learn me further on that. I would expect you to correct me, or rather to learn me on this one. And I so hope that the teacher was part of the meeting, because I can think, I can forethink what he was going to say. But look, there is
He's in the meeting.
Oh, you are here. Sorry, Diti, I didn't see you coming. There is a perception that the education of Zimbabwe is giving better skills than our education. And in this question, I'm comparing Zimbabwe and ourselves. And whilst as the country, and you are even saying that we are placed well internationally, and I think Honorable Lodada as well has said that we are not doing bad. I am not saying we are doing bad. But what makes our learners to exit system? And DPE would be better placed. That's why I'm saying I'm even thinking, I'm even knowing what the DG would say in responding in this question. What makes our learners to exit the system and who would not know where they are? Or rather, what would make Zimbabwe to give better skills than ourselves? And I want to couple this question. And recently we had a presentation about the issue of foreign nationals. I mean, the foreign nationals, they are entering in this country, and in most of our high schools now, the perception is that they are the ones who are giving mathematics and physical science as we speak. So why would it continuously be perceived you rather come from Zimbabwe and have better education than what we could offer as a country? And then in your view, Umalusi, what value has the NSC towards the growth of our South African economy? And I also want to add on what Honorable Noda said with regards to the history as a subject. Is it excluded in the study because of it is no longer there, or you have excluded because of it is, looks like it is really excluded generally also in our schools? So those are the questions from my side, and I am going to give to DBE first, probably DG, and welcome. Or must we end off by you?
Please check, can I please come in?
Okay, fine.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, honorable members, the Chair of Umalusi, Professor Balem, and congratulations on your new responsibility to lead the council, and to the CEO and the hardworking team of Umalusi, senior managers of the department, and colleagues who are supporting the portfolio committee. Honorable members, thank you for affording us the privilege to participate in this discussion. I am constrained by the fact that, as you would know, that I've been sent out by your oversight work to say I must go out and monitor the work of the department. So I might be constrained by connectivity availability or ability to connect throughout. So Dr. Polia is in a better position to respond to all of these things blow by blow. We send him because we know he's able to do that from a curriculum and even assessment point of view. Just one or two points. I want to also add my voice in congratulating Umalusi for this excellent work. This is not the first work done by Umalusi of this nature. Honorable Noda, we also have done a similar exercise, but your question is spot on. What is the real value of this? In many countries, established democracies, curriculum change and transformation is not informed by who comes into power. There is a policy that regulates curriculum change, driven by empirical exercise, such as the one that we have just received from Umalusi. And these exercises inform our ongoing work of curriculum development and curriculum change. I can assure you that this study and the study before it and the studies that we have done have confirmed our correctness in changing our curriculum. The committee will remember that in 2018, we brought in 18 new subjects, which included technical maths and technical science, precisely informed by exercises of this nature. We've been thinking about coming up with other changes that are not necessarily going to be informed by political developments in the country, as I've indicated before. But we are also in a process of developing a framework for curriculum change, so that that framework informs when we bring about changes and what would be those changes predicated on. because they must be informed by research more than anything else. So that, you know, whatever decision you take is based on empirical evidence that is provided at a given point in time. So we've been talking about the need to narrow our curriculum offerings because they are too wide. In other words, some of these findings have confirmed what we've been working on. I mean, you've heard that in a subject like physical science, many countries have split this subject into two, into chemistry and physics, and learners start specializing fairly early. But as Dr. Rakometsi also indicated that the context and the history might be different. Our curriculum change is driven by experts from universities, practitioners from the classroom, NGOs, and an array of role players who are driving a curriculum change in the country. I'm also trying to respond to the question that says, why is it that learners are unable to cope at universities? But I'm sure Dr. Polia will also respond specifically to that, because there are a number of factors. You know, the curriculum could be one. There could be external factors to learning. And some of those factors are covered by other studies elsewhere in terms of learners who are studying at university level. So I also want to say factors informing the fact that learners get employed or not. The curriculum is just but one. There are a myriad of factors which inform structural changes in our education and training system, some of which is the split in the curriculum. For instance, countries that seem to experience much better placement in employment and much better economic growth seem to have a larger number of their learners following the vocational and occupational stream, 50 to 60%. I can mention countries like Singapore, China, India, and so on. The countries like Germany and others are bordering around, 40 and 50%, which is what we are trying to move towards with the three-stream model, that the majority of our learners must really offer, as it would be the case with any population in any country, they must offer vocational and occupational streams or programs than academic streams. You do need medical doctors, you do need others and so on, but the majority of any population must get into streams that can afford them self-employment, must afford them the capability to create jobs than to even look for jobs. The three-stream model is going to try and answer that. Schools of skills that are embedded in the notion of the three-stream curriculum, which Honorable Nodada talked about. But these options are very expensive. Technical high schools, to establish them, are extremely expensive, and it's going to take time for the country, but that's the direction that we need to follow. Chair, I hope that my comments have been useful. I don't want to be too long, rather give Dr. Polia, who's more advantaged than I am in terms of connectivity, to answer specific questions as asked by honorable members. But I must say that this study is important so that people don't just get onto the bandwagon of 30%, but look at broader, vexing, complex issues that are informed by an empirical study such as this one, as to how do you compare the qualifications, whether the qualifications compares favorably with others or not. I would be cautious to say that one education system is better than the other. They serve different contexts, They address issues emanating from different histories. That's why countries are not always willing to open up to exercises of this nature. It's not many countries that would really willingly say, yes, come and see what we are doing and look at the strengths and the weaknesses of our education system. Countries are much more cautious in doing something like this. But I want to thank Umalusi and thank the Portfolio Committee for affording us the opportunity to engage on matters such as this one. My view, I would want to support the chair. It requires more than 2 hours or 3 hours. This is a workshop exercise to immerse ourselves in the details of the differences in the qualification, differences in the subjects, what are the implications for the country, what options can we consider as a country going forward. Thank you very much. I would humbly request that Dr. Rufus Polia and other colleagues who are on the platform to come and answer specific questions that honorable members have put to us. Thank you very much for the privilege. Dr. Polia.
Thank you, DG, and thank you, Honorable Chairperson, once again. And I think our DG has provided an excellent overview, which covers the questions very broadly. And I'm going to try to be specific in terms of the questions raised. And I think Honorable Nodada made a very important opening statement, and I think it's one that we must all hold on to. And the statement he made was that our education system is not as bad as we think it is. And I think as a South African nation, we are extremely critical of what we do, which is extremely beneficial. But I think as we criticize the system, we must not undermine the gains, and we must not for one moment forget to reflect on where we come from and where we are. Having said that, I think, Honorable Chairperson, we're all aware that we've come a long way in terms of our journey, but we are certainly not where we need to be. And I think what our DG was telling us is, what are some of our plans and what is the vision we have in terms of where do we want to get to? Now, I think the question that came up very strongly by most of our honorable members is, what is the intention of this report? Any report, if just received and that's where it ends, is going to be of no value. Now, let me just say, Honorable Chairperson, that this report could not have come at a more appropriate time. Post-COVID, and at our National Lekgotla in January, we as a DBE presented a plan or a draft plan for the strengthening, for the modernization, and I like the word used by Honorable Nodada, for the rejigging of the curriculum. And more importantly, I think over the last few months as a department and with all our key stakeholders, including Umalusi, we've been reflecting very deeply at the quality of teaching and learning in our classrooms. So we are at a point at the moment where we are reviewing the curriculum. And just to give a little bit of background, we've reviewed our curriculum in the context of COVID. And one of the criticism that has been leveled against the South African curriculum over the last few years is that our curriculum is too broad, but it lacks in depth. They say that our curriculum is a mile wide, but an inch deep. And I think that is also surfacing from this particular report. So with the review of the annual teaching plans, the review of our CAPs, what we've done in the last 2 years, in 2020 as well as 2021, is to now come up with what we call a content map. And in the content map, we look at what is core in a phase. So if a learner is in grade 4, moving into grade 5, grade 6, what is core in terms of the concepts, the content, the skills that the learner needs to develop. And I think for me, Honorable Chair, as much as COVID, has been negative in more ways than one, but I think this process that we started off has now caused us to move away from content and knowledge coverage to focusing more on what this report is also raising in terms of skills development. And that's where I think our system is lacking. So we're focusing on reducing content, but more importantly, in terms of strengthening the curriculum, we're talking about looking at competencies. And it's interesting that we had an engagement with Kenya. We also had an engagement with Zimbabwe. And all of these countries, or both of these countries, have already moved to a competency-based framework. And we are saying that we are possibly a little more cautious. We want to do the necessary research. But Honorable Chair, we've already started a consultation process where we're going to look at a South African competency-based framework. And I think that's the point that is being made by the CEO of Umalusi, is that we can look at all the good practices happening and admire all the beautiful flowers. But please, we need to understand that the conditions of our soil, our climatic conditions and environmental conditions must be looked at very closely so that the curriculum we produce can flourish in our environment. And that's basically what we're doing. In fact, the consultation process has just started, and we're hoping that the consultation process will take us about 6 months. And I think thereafter, Honorable Chairperson and Honorable Members, we will be in a position to share with the Portfolio Committee what is the draft competency-based framework for South Africa and how we're going to move away from knowledge. Now, I think in our previous evaluations of the curriculum, done by the old UK NARIC, and what is appearing in the evaluation done by ECTIS, is that our curriculum is certainly of world-class standard. And in fact, if you look at the preamble to our curriculum statement, all these competencies and all of these desirable learning outcomes are all couched in the preamble of our curriculum. And I think one of the honorable members in the questioning mentioned that the problem lies with our implementation. And if you look at our schooling context, because of their diversity and because of the fact that we have top performing schools, mediocre performing schools, and low performing schools, the differences and the implementation in terms of the curriculum varies. And I think those are the kinds of divides that we need to implement. And in fact, in one of our discussions, we said that we need to consider differentiation more closely in terms of the South African context without stigmatizing our school, but looking at differentiation more from a support perspective rather than wanting to categorize schools, so that we understand that different schools must be treated differently so that they can be supported appropriately to take us to where we need to. So I think that's the first point, that this report comes at the right time. And in terms of our plan, our focus is on recovery for 2023, 2024. And in 2025, we're hoping to begin with elements of our modernized, our strengthened curriculum, which will be competency-based and which will move the focus away from knowledge acquisition for the sake of knowledge to looking at knowledge application. And one of the other elements that's missing in our curriculum is that we look at knowledge, but we do not look at the other aspects, which are sometimes regarded as soft skills, which is about attitudes, values, and more importantly, character development. And this is what the new framework is going to focus on. How do you develop the individual holistically and not look at just measuring his performance in an examination in terms of how much of knowledge he has gained? And I can mention to you, Honorable Nadada, that we're doing some exciting piloting in the GET with regard to assessment. We're looking at how do you use, for example, project-based assessment to assess the other skills which cannot be assessed through a typical controlled 3-hour examination. And we're piloting, and we're also building the capacity of our teachers so that these other forms of assessments, which are critical, will now come to the fore. The other important point, Honorable Chairperson, is that with COVID, we have reduced the weighting of examinations. And obviously we had to do this. We were pushed into a corner because we could not administer exams. And I'm talking about grade 11 and lower. For example, in the GET band, 80% currently of the assessment is school-based. So what we're doing, honorable members, is placing a greater focus on the teacher in the classroom, the teacher assessing the learner, because the teacher spends all of his time with the learner in the classroom, and he best knows how learners are progressing in terms of the outcomes, instead of depending on an external examination, which is conducted under very strict and more importantly, high stakes condition, which creates a lot of stress. And you and I know that learners not all perform at their best under exam condition. So continuous assessment, and the term that is possibly heard in various assessment circles is assessment for learning rather than assessment of learning. Assessment of learning is important, but assessment for learning is now being rolled out, and we have training programs where we assess learners continuously. So the teacher in the classroom must assess and restructure his lessons, his teaching, in terms of whether the outcomes are being achieved. So we want to move away from the previous approach of focusing on covering topics in the curriculum to rather looking at what are the outcomes that a learner must be able to demonstrate at the end of each grade. And if the learner cannot demonstrate the grade specific outcomes, then we must go back. So we're going to come back to the portfolio committee with some very paradigm changes in terms of assessment, in terms of viewing how the academic year is managed, and how we progress from one grade to the other, which is not something that we are kind of looking at in our own context, but these are international changes that are taking place in assessment. Now, the Honorable Nodada stressed the point about the low level of bachelor achievement. Honorable Nodada, with all humility, I'm not sure if I heard you correctly. I thought I heard you say something like 13% of bachelors. In fact, the correct figure last year, we had 36.4% admission to bachelor studies by our grade 12 learners. And in fact, the year prior, it was also 36.4 in 2020. And in 2019, it was 36.9. I'm not saying that 36.4 and 36.9 are something to be celebrated, but all I'm saying, it's not as bad as 13%, if I heard you correctly, Honorable Nodada, but it simply means that we are progressing. If you look at where we were in terms of our bachelor attainments 20 years ago, I think 20 years ago, we were around 15%, but we've moved to above 30%. And I think we're on the right trajectory. And all we need to do is to move with greater speed in terms of improving our performance. Now, in terms of performance of our learners at higher education institutions, I agree with you that there is certainly a lack of synergy between basic education and higher education. And in fact, our DG has asked us to make a presentation at a senior management meeting, which took place 2 weeks ago. And the question that the DG asked us to answer was, how do we strengthen and develop a seamless system between basic education and higher education? And we came up with almost 15 implementable suggestions in terms of how we work more closely with higher education in developing the seamless system. And that could also be presented at some point so that we work more closely. And I think with this curriculum change that we are currently planning, honorable members, we are making sure that higher education is involved in these curriculum changes. It's senseless us making all these curriculum changes, but higher education does not amend its assessment programs, its requirements. And we believe that there has to be a complete overhaul in terms of education, both at the basic and the at the higher education level. I agree with you about cramming, and therefore we want to move away from an exam focus to more an assessment focus. And obviously, Umalusi is very guarded about the NSC. And as much as we've made changes to the assessment from grade R to grade 11, grade 12 has been left untouched. But we've set a task team, and that task team is going to be looking at grade 12 and how do we make amendments to the grade 12 curriculum, if necessary, to the grade 12 assessment without altering the standard. And I think there are ways in which we could still review the curriculum, but maintain the integrity, credibility, and standard of the NSC. The three-stream model, I think our DG has covered that adequately, but if I could just add that we are currently piloting a number of subjects, occupational subjects, as well as vocational subjects in grade 8 and 9. And the reason for these subjects being implemented in grade 8 and 9 is that we feel that our learners must be given exposure in grade 8 and 9 to a few vocational subjects and occupational subjects. And then what will happen is that at the grade 9 level, we're going to implement a standardized assessment, which would be part of the GEC, but part of the assessment regime at the end of grade 9, which is going to prepare learners for grade 10, and the three-stream model will be what we are calling an inclinations assessment, where every learner will then be assessed in terms of whether his inclination is towards the academic, the vocational, or the occupational. So together with the exposure that the learner will get in grade 8, it's grade 7, 8, and 9. It's 8 and 9 in the main. The learner will get exposure to these occupational and vocational subjects. So together with that exposure, together with the inclinations assessment, the learner can then, together with his parent, make a determination whether he should follow the occupational or the vocational stream. And I think our DG, our minister, have accepted this, that part of the problem of our system is that we are kind of squeezing all our learners into an academic stream when these learners will flourish if avoided or provided rather with opportunities in the occupational as well as the vocational. So we're moving in that direction. Maybe we're not moving as fast as we should, but I just want to tell you that part of the curriculum strengthening process, which we want to implement in 2025, is to develop a vocational and an occupational curriculum for both grades 10, moving into grade 11 and grade 12. So these developments are on the way. And I think you're right, Honorable Nodada, upskilling of our teachers is critical. And therefore we need to work very closely with higher education so that they develop teachers with the right skill set coming out of university to be able to be absorbed by our schools and used to promote the three streams model. I know you've spoken a lot to Honorable Nodada about decentralization. I think if you look at it internationally, given the importance of a curriculum has to, in the main, be the setter of national norms and standards. Obviously, we set national norms and standards through the curriculum, but it does not mean that at the level of the district, at the level of the province, there is no room to accommodate a certain provincial priorities and provincial imperatives. I think the curriculum does allow for that, but I think what you're telling us, look at that a little more closely as you review and strengthen the curriculum so that our curriculum becomes more relevant to the environment in which our learners find themselves. Honorable Siwela, you raised the issue about depth, and I think I've answered the question about depth, that we've already started reviewing the curriculum, focusing on core concepts. And even in the review, we are now going to say less is more. So if you have fewer topics, but you drill down deeper with the learners. So when you drill deeper, you can develop the application skills,
the skills of synthesis and evaluation using limited knowledge, rather than being concerned about covering knowledge coverage over a number of topics and not developing the appropriate skills that are required. Is the lack of depth contributing to poor performance at university? I would say yes. And I think that we will now make sure that deeper learning becomes the focus rather than curriculum coverage. I think the report also says that we are prescriptive in our approach, and I think that prescription is what we need to look at. But I think our prescription in the main is simply because as a developing country, you want to make sure that learners take your maths or maths literacy. You want to make sure that life orientation is not an optional subject. And obviously, we want to make sure that our languages are promoted, particularly in terms of home languages and the language of learning and teaching. But obviously, we will look at all of these issues more closely and see whether the level of prescription can be reduced. I think what has also been indicated is that we have clear entry requirements, which is not the case with some of the other countries. But let me also say that for our adult learners, we have the senior certificate qualification, which is equivalent to the NSC. And in the case of the senior certificate, the entry requirements are set very low. All the learner has to satisfy is be 21 years of age, and he must have completed grade 9 or an equivalence of grade 9. So we're making provision for our adults who may not meet the entry requirements which we want our school learners to satisfy. And Honorable Morachella, I think you're spot on. Maths is a critical subject, and we need to then look at our maths more critically. And I think the fact that we've moved to technical maths already indicates that we're looking at maths that will support the vocational and the occupational stream. But now that we have technical maths, maths literacy, and what we refer to as mathematics, I think, Honorable Morachella, you're correct that we need to go and look at the maths and make sure that the technical maths is in fact fit for purpose, and that it will certainly support learners that want to follow the vocational as well as the occupational stream. But I think it's still early days. We've just introduced these subjects, and we're monitoring them very closely, evaluating, and will certainly make the amendments based on what is coming from reports like the one Umalusi has already implemented, together with what our schools are telling us. I think, does the findings of this reflect the need to review the curriculum? I must indicate that Umalusi has confidentially made the subject reports available to us already. We've shared it confidentially and under embargo conditions with some of our subject specialists, and we asked them to look at the subject-specific report, look at the specifics that are being raised in terms of geography and still being outdated, and life sciences not having, a mathematical emphasis. So we're looking at all of these, and like I said, it comes at just in the nick of time, and it certainly is going to help us moving forward. Honorable Chairperson, I think you raised the issue about pass requirements, and I'm sure Umalusi will be able to respond. But can I just say, from our side as a department, we have looked at international research, but different countries have a different approach to pass-fail. And for example, if you look at the UK system, and this is why some of them refer to it as a program, what they do is they present you with a statement of result, and they just indicate to you that this is the performance level of the learner without indicating whether the learner has passed or failed. For example, if you look at the IB, the International Baccalaureate, they work on a 7-point scale. And what they say is that the learner can even get a score as low as 1 on the 7-point scale. But all they want to see is that out of a total of 45, I think the learner must get a total score, if my memory serves me right, I think it's around 30, around the 30. So in other words, they look at, it's 24 points out of 45 points. And that's when they say that you satisfied the requirements of this particular diploma. And we need to possibly look at it a little more closely, whether we want to continue with this notion of a group certificate and pass fail. And I think all of these issues are issues that we're going to be discussing, and obviously obtaining guidance from portfolio committee, from Umalusi, in terms of moving forward. I think the issue of English, is it offered as home language and file? I think we leave that to Umalusi to answer. Technical maths, I think I commented on that. Yeah, I think the one about Zimbabwe and the perception, let me not go there. And I think our DG has covered that adequately. Honorable Chair, I know I've gone a little bit too far, my apologies, but I think sometimes we do get carried away, and I hope that we have addressed all the questions raised, Honorable Chairperson. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, DG and Dr. Paulia. Prof. Balim, can you lead Umalusi's responses?
Yes, Chair, thank you very much. I want to make a few comments. I see that Honorable Nodada has his hand up. You may want to take his further question, or do you want me to go ahead?
No, go ahead, Prof. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to make a few high-level comments, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Rakometsi to speak perhaps to the more specific issues. The first issue, I guess, is to emphasize the point that we're talking about a system, that there's a National Senior Certificate, but that the National Senior Certificate is an assessment instrument reflecting a particular performance of a system. And we must be careful that we don't put more burden on the National Senior Certificate than it is able to bear. Dr. Polio happened to agree with Honorable Nodada. I did want to take issue with him on his comment that the NSC is not as bad as we think it is. I want us to be cautious about getting a bit too pessimistic about what we do in South Africa. But to say it more seriously, the issue of the National Senior Certificate as being primarily an instrument for allowing access into education, we need to be cautious of that kind of view. It certainly is an important part of what the National Senior Certificate is meant to do, but it is not the entire story. There is meaning in the National Senior Certificate that goes beyond what it means or its utility value for the higher education sector. Let me first say that, and I've said this as Vice Chancellor of, and to my fellow Vice Chancellors at the time, it is irrational for the university sector to say to Umalusi or to the Department of Basic Education, you must give us students who are guaranteed to pass. That is not only irrational, it's also ridiculous. However, what the higher education system can do is say to Umalusi, we would like to receive students whose matric or NSC certificates have meaning, and we understand the difference between a B and a C, for example. But more importantly, that meaning is sustained over time, that a B last year will mean similar to what a B means this year. The fact that students fail at higher education may well be part of the way in which the education system works and the way in which the NSC works. But it is also a part of the way in which the universities themselves work. Chair, you may remember that at Salt Lake University, we took the view that we would not have bridging courses and still produced fairly high pass rates and this university continues to do that without any bridging courses. And our argument was the National Senior Certificate is a competent examination system. Ours is to understand that system as a university and then to set up the pedagogy, the curriculum, and the teaching processes at our university to take students from where they arrive at the NSC to where we would like them to be as graduates. And that's a conversation that we must have as a system, not as with a focus on the National Senior Certificate. Its meaning, the whole exercise of this research project was to remind ourselves, but also the country, of the meaning of the National Senior Certificate. We've chosen to hold ourselves up to reflect these particular mirrors. It could be that we choose other mirrors. There may be other things that we want to do reflect in these mirrors, and those comments have been made. But what we really are trying to do is to remind ourselves and to just, as a milestone, say that what we're doing is actually comparable. It's not exactly equal, and it should never be, but it is comparable to what is happening in other parts of the world. The criticism of the performance of the system is correct, and that we would share. It is correct that it is a problem that only, and I stand to be corrected on the figures, but only about 22 or 23% of students who take maths or physics in the National Senior Certificate system will achieve at least 50%. And that's a criticism. We must take that. But that's not the National Senior Certificate. What we can't do is say, well, the exams are too difficult, we have to ease them out. No, we can't do that. What we're going to do is, as Dr. Polia and the DG has mentioned, we have to think anew about the way in which we prepare these students. And it is a concern that the National Senior Certificate represents an assessment of 12 years of schooling, which also means that for many of young people in this country who come from perhaps township schools or rural schools, the decision about whether or not you will get access to a university education is actually made in grade 1, not in grade 12. And so these are realities that we must keep in our minds as we think about the system. My comment about the idea that the NSC is not as bad as we think it is yes, there are reasons for us sometimes to be pessimistic. But if we also align that pessimism with a nostalgia, with an inactivity, then what we do is we create a beast that eats itself. And so we say the system is terrible, we can't do anything about it, so as a result it becomes worse. This conversation, this study, the conversation we're having with the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee, and some of the very critical and intelligent questions we've been getting from colleagues on the committee, says that this is a country, this is a system that is not resting on its laurels. It's asking hard questions of itself. And that gives me comfort, Chair. I want to also say that as university sector, we make the statement, and I think it's justified, that our higher education system in this country is probably the best and most rigorous higher education system on the continent. And I don't think that we can debate. I take comfort from that. But that statement is not possible in a country that has a poor school system, grade 12 system, grade 1 to 12 system. It would not be possible for the higher education system in this country to make that statement if we didn't have a fairly competent National Senior Certificate system. And finding the opportunities for improving and continuously reflecting on what we do is actually the positive development. I want to make another comment. Almost everybody commented about mathematics, and I worry that we sometimes think about these things out of context. I've often heard casual observers say, well, a medical doctor does not need to be given a course in geometry, because medical doctors almost never measure angles or concern themselves with spatial relations between different points. Sorry, Chair, I should qualify this. I am a civil engineer. My current home base is in civil engineering at Wits University. I do, however, work in computational mathematics, and I have given much thought to the disciplinary implications of what it means to be a mathematician as opposed to an applied mathematician. My work in computational mathematics is essentially applied mathematics, which is distinct and different from mathematics as a pure science discipline. Let me say that my response to those who say that doctors don't need geometry is to say, well, geometry is not about angles. Geometry is about teaching young people the competence to understand the difference between inductive and deductive reasoning. That's why you take a course in geometry. And if you aren't able to tell the difference between inductive and deductive reasoning, you aren't able to be a competent medical doctor. Diagnosis is outside of your range of skills if you aren't able to tell the difference between those forms of reasoning. Mathematics we need to remind ourselves, is a branch of philosophy, not science. And it is interesting that you would have heard in the report that there's an examination system that does not allow a calculator in a mathematics exams. That, I guess, is the way we should be teaching mathematics. Mathematics is about logical forms of reasoning. And when we think of mathematics in its instrumentalist form, in its application form, we are thinking of applied mathematics, which is where mathematics and technological maths should find a home. And that's really where it finds a home. And so I think it is important that we tell the difference between these two forms of mathematics, one as developing competence in reasoning, the other as developing the application of mathematical methods to solve real-world problems, which ultimately is what engineers do. I'm an engineer. What separates us from the sciences is one word: design. I have to come up with a product even if I don't know why it works, which is an offensive concept to the pure sciences. Chair, I've also acknowledged that in the questions that I've heard from Parliamentary Portfolio Committee members, it's clear to me, and this is my first interaction, we must find time for longer conversations and more reasoned, and perhaps with differently colored liquids in our hands, in the form of tea and coffee, I must emphasize. We need to find the time when we can talk to each other on these subjects. I just want to use an example. It bothers me that...
Prof, you must avoid tea and coffee. DG still owes Nodada a coffee. Yeah.
Well, we must deliver on that promise.
There that he's looking at you like, hey, you know what you're talking about.
we must deliver on our promise. But we certainly have to find time for deepened conversations. Let me use two examples. It troubles me that all our students who arrive at university in first year know that the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the square on the other two sides. That's the Pythagoras theorem. But I've yet to meet a student who can prove that. Equally, it bothers me that our students know the difference between a past tense and a future tense in a sentence, but they can't tell what a future pluperfect is or a past pluperfect. But both my criticisms are not useful. And I want to emphasize that these are not useful criticisms of the high school system. Because the question I ask myself is, when I expose students to a proof of the Pythagoras theorem, will they be able to understand it? And the answer is yes. I'm happy that the mathematics system is producing competent students. When I explain to them what a past pluperfect is, they understand it. They understand how it fits into a sentence. And so I'm trying to emphasize the point that I guess Dr. Polya was making, which is we need to think differently about competence and the content of the curriculum and the skills that we develop. Those are different concepts, and we need to think through them carefully. That competence is actually more important because content knowledge will shift with time. There was a time when you could do a degree in quantity surveying. Well, you can't do that anymore because technology displaced it. And that is an example of how spurious content knowledge can be. Content knowledge will change with time. Competence remains, and that's what we must focus on. I also wanted to talk just briefly and make a comment about the place of ICT. There's lots of talk about fourth industrial revolution, and somehow or the other we think that this is the future, and these are important issues. But I do want to locate that in the world of the applied sciences. Chair, you may be aware that together with Professor Loiso Nonga, I was one of the people who started the first BSc in data science at Salt Lake University. It's the first on the African continent. Well, we located that as a science, not as an applied science. It's not data analytics, it's not big data. It is data science. Its foundations are in discrete mathematics. And so as we think about preparing students for competencies in these worlds of robotics, astronomy, data analytics, etc. What we also have to think about is what are the underpinnings of the mathematical sciences that will better prepare them for that. Because the work that is currently being done in data analytics in 15 years' time will be old hat. Yet our students and our graduates must still be competent. Let me, and on the point of the difference between Zimbabwe and South Africa, you're right. I hear lots of people say the students who arrive out of high school system in Zimbabwe appear to be better prepared than students who arrive out of the South African system. For me at a university, I find when I get to postgraduate studies, South African students appear to be better prepared for postgraduate studies than I feel some of the, not only Zimbabwean, but some Southern African country students are. These are debates that we can have. And I think while we did have a conversation about the appropriateness of the flower metaphor, and Dr. Rakometsi will comment on that. And of course, Honorable Nodada has picked up on the limits of that metaphor. We do want to say that as we compare across countries, we must be careful that we don't compare at too narrow a level. What we want to look at is how do citizens in those countries believe their contributions are being made? Chair, your question of the value of NSC to economic growth is an extremely difficult question to answer. I remember an economic study on the relationship between education, levels of education and economic activity that concluded better education does contribute to better economic outcomes, but it depends on context. So the question again is about context. Chair, let me stop there and hand over to Dr. Rakometsi in case he wants to add any final comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Prof. Balim. Thank you, honorable members, for the questions. I'm not going to answer to all the questions that were raised. I'm only going to focus on areas where I think Umalusi will give a different dimension in terms of our response. The NSC is not only intended for university entrance. It prepares people for the world of work. It prepares people to be good citizens. That is why the levels of passes at the NSC level are at higher certificate, diploma, and bachelor's. It is only a bachelor that will allow you into a university, but a diploma and a high certificate will not give you easy access into a bachelor studies. And even the bachelor passes, you have to pass at different levels for you to be admitted in different faculties. Medicine, engineering, for instance, we all know about faculty-specific point scores. We've got a term for that. We all know that term when our children have to go to university. So it is not only for university. Now, the question that is asked by Honorable Nodad about the high unemployment rate, I wouldn't want to blame it on the NSC per se, but blame it on the skills match that we have as people choose their careers. I had a talk at one church where I was invited as a guest speaker, and I was advising students on career guidance. And I said to them they should check the areas of skills shortages in South Africa as they choose their careers. And the Department of Home Affairs makes that available from time to time to say, we'll give special permits and visas to people from outside the country who have skills in these specific areas. So I think it is not a matter that has to be blamed on the NSC, but in terms of the choices that people make as they choose their careers. I need to mention this, that Kenya, it was not part of the study, but interacting with the colleagues from Kenya, I know that what they put on the certificates is the level at which a learner has passed his or her subjects. But they don't indicate a pass or a fail. They don't. They don't indicate bachelor's, diploma, or higher certificate. A university will decide with the kind of symbols that a student has obtained whether he has to be admitted at the university or not. The Kenya National Examinations Council does not pronounce pass or fail, it just gives the symbols and they leave it at that. The reason why students don't perform well with the NSC, it is because maybe it is not following a three streams model, which says, how are you gifted as an individual? People are gifted differently. That is why I support the idea of three streams model, which takes into account in which areas are you gifted. Therefore, you have to be channeled in that field. Let me venture into something, and I hope it will land as intended. The NSC is the best qualification in the world. The NSC is the best qualification in the world. And I want to repeat for the third time. It is the best qualification in the world for the people of South Africa. In the same way as the Kenya School Living Certificate, it is the best qualification in the world. The NSC is. The Kenya one is the best for the people of Kenya because of context and because of history and because of the demands of this country. I think I've made the point adequately. The NSC is the best qualification in the world for the people of South Africa. I think it has landed in the manner that I had wanted it to land. Because if we were to take, for instance, the Kenyan qualification and transplant it into South Africa, it will fail dismally because it doesn't take context into account. The same with the flower metaphor. That flower from Kenya, if we were to transplant it here, it will fail because of the weather conditions and because of the context. The protea will fail in Zimbabwe in the same way. Honorable Nodada, yes, context is a challenge in South Africa. We find in the NSC examinations instances where students are thrown off in terms of responding to questions because he comes from a rural area. He doesn't understand what the question is trying, and we try to mitigate that through moderation of question papers. The urban and the rural. Some things are not easily understandable if you operate in the urban context, and vice versa. Some things are not easily understood if you operate in the rural context. But we have to get comfort in the fact that we're preparing learners here for South African citizenship. Making an example, I studied in the deep rural area of Kwakwa. That is where I did my high school. Deep rural. From Putatichaba, you still have to drive 30 kilometers into Kwakwa. But I studied way back then about the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. When I studied economics, I studied about ESCOM because I was being prepared not to remain in that environment of Kwakwa, but to be a South African citizen that I am today. If we were to look at where we come from as a people, before 1994, we had each province having its own exams. In the white dispensation House of Assembly, we had different TBVC states having their own exams. Then we had the rest of others being under DET. We did not have a national system. After 1994, we still had the 9 provinces running the examinations. We ultimately transitioned, and Dr. Polia and I are part of that history. We then transitioned into national examinations, where we say everybody writes the same thing. And I think that is an achievement that we have to applaud. And Dr. Polia is saying it is very important that the district-specific things are also brought into the curriculum. The curriculum allows that flexibility. So that we don't lock our students also into Kwakwa, where I come from with my high school. The other element which has been mentioned, but not to the extent that I would have loved, is why students perform badly at the university. It is maybe the teaching style. They are not used to the teaching style that is used at the high school. There are a lot of factors coupled with independence. They are on their own. The parents are not, and the transition is not easy. However, Umalusi did a study which we can share with the honorable members. And that study found that the NSC is a good predictor of success at the university. If you did well in the NSC, the prediction of the NSC is that you'll do well at the university. We have that study at Umalusi that we did with a number of universities in the country. Honorable Nodada, yes, indeed, this report is not going to end up in the shelves. When we did the 2010 study and shared it with the department, the minister did a review of the curriculum, and that's how we had the CAPS curriculum. The input of Umalusi with the 2010 report led to the CAPS report. And even in this instance, as Dr. Poli has indicated, we are going to allow the Umalusi officials and the officials of the department and other stakeholders to take a deep dive into the subject-specific issues that have been raised in the report and make a recommendation to Umalusi and the minister on things that could be changed, including whether we leave physical science as it is or we separate physical science and chemistry in the manner that it is happening in other countries. Let me see. The DBE, it shows with the consideration of our 2010 report, with the introduction of the CAPS, that it takes the advice that we give to them seriously. The scope of any research report is constrained by a number of factors, including the budget. That is why we could not cover certain subjects like technical mathematics. That is why we could not have the opportunity to do certain things that we would have loved to do. However, every research report gives an opportunity for further expansion to say we did not touch technical mathematics, we did not touch history. Whoever else wants to expand on this, because of other constraints, you could not do it. You can do it. So that this research is creating that opportunity as well. I've spoken about national versus municipal level. Let me just come to the issue of mathematics. Honorable Muratse, I'm not going to respond to things that have been responded to already. South Africa and the Department of Basic Education has to be commended for making mathematics in one form or the other compulsory for our students. If you don't take pure mathematics, you take math lit or technical mathematics and so forth and so on. In my day as a student, I did not do any maths at matric. That was a serious handicap. So our department has to be commended for doing that, introducing a type of mathematics as compulsory. Okay. I'm tempted to go to the debates about 30% pass, and I'm trying to restrain myself. I'm not going to go there. We have had that debate previously. I'm saying our qualification has been tailored to suit our conditions in South Africa. On research and statistics and data, my recollection is that even though I did not have maths at matric level, at fourth year level at university, I was taught research methodologies, which included statistics. And I've been able to cope thus far because I was able to do a master's and a PhD. So that research methodologies are taught by different universities at fourth year level in particular, but to some extent at third year level. So in fact, from first year, when you do your assignments, you're already doing research. But specific research methodologies are dealt with at that level. Honorable Chairperson Membingo Gigaba, yes, this study saw some similarities from one point to the other and differences. So that when you do comparative education, you come across the common and the diverse. The common meaning the similarities and the diverse meaning the differences. I remember in comparative education, there was a textbook we studied way back then. The title was just the common and the diverse. Because when you look at the Kenyan system, you're going to find something that is common with us. You're going to find something that is different from what we're doing. I want to put my head on the block and say the NSC is adding value to our economy. Yes, it is adding value. We are producing doctors. We have done the NSC. We are producing engineers. We have done the NSC. We are producing teachers, nurses, journalists. The economy is running. The question is, what Honorable Noda has asked, at what level are these kids passing? I wish more could be passing at bachelor level. But it's not everybody who passes at that level. And I want to repeat that history as a subject was not part of the study, but the opportunity exists for other researchers to do a comparative study in the manner that they wish. Chairperson, Honorable Chairperson and Professor Balim, I would ask Mr. Leporta to have a final bite. There could be other areas of the questions that he may want to amplify. With your permission, Mr. Leporta.
Thank you, Dr. Akometsi. Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, honorable members of the Portfolio Committee. Dr. Akometsi, I think all the issues have been responded to, but I do want to say a thing or two. With respect to the lessons that we have learned from the study, I want to indicate that a similar study was also done by the Independent Examinations Board, and that study was done by the UK NARIC. In its conclusion, the study done by the IEB said the NSC is more than fit for purpose and is comparable internationally. We did a similar study a year or two later, which arrived at the same conclusion. This study, which we are presenting to members of parliament, is actually saying there is nothing untoward. So it's confirming the findings of the previous studies that were done in this area. So that is the one thing that I wanted to indicate. On the basis of the lessons that we have learned from all these studies, the one thing that we can all agree about is that the National Senior Certificate provides South African learners with an internationally comparable level of education. Whether we can say, what is it that makes it not possible for the outcomes to be the same? It's a discussion for another platform, as the chairperson of Umalusi Council has said. And I do agree with the point made that the NSC serves multiple purposes, and that it serves multiple purposes, it's something that we learn from the National Development Plan. If we read the National Development Plan in conjunction with the white paper on post-school education and training, it says the aim of having a little over 4.5 million people participating in the PSET system. And of that number, the university sector accounts for only about 1.5 million. So what this does say to us is that the NSC serves multiple purposes, one of which is to channel people into the TVET system so that by the time they conclude their studies in the TVET system, they can participate meaningfully in the building of the economy of the country. So those are my points, CO. Thank you, and thank you to the chairperson and members of the Portfolio Committee.
Do you have a follow-up? Not that.
Yes, Chair. Yes,
Proceed.
quite a few points. Thanks, Chair, and thanks for warning the Chair there about coffee and tea, because there's a backlog in that instance. Chair, first of all, I want to support your request that in terms of curriculum and the structure and how everything is set up in the system in terms of the framework and what is expected to be implemented, as a committee, we actually are presented to that so that it better equips the committee in kind of following the different developments in the DBE as part of our role as as an oversight body. So I want to support that if that was your initial request, and if not, I'd like to propose that that we get that full presentation on how the curriculum is set up in the framework, and the role in which we need to play in our oversight responsibilities, but also what contributions we can make in terms of improving it. Definitely with all the speakers that have spoken, that It's important to preserve the pockets of excellence that we have. I think I fully agree with that. You know, we must always preserve the pockets of excellence that we have in the system, in the NSC. What the pockets of excellence that are there, we must always preserve. But our role and responsibility, the reason why we conduct such research is to how to make it better, to make sure that those that can't utilize it to access opportunity at a later stage, it is improved to a point whereby they can be able to use it. Now, I want to just go to the DG quickly, Chair, to say that maybe it's time, maybe the department DG considers whether is grade 8 and 9 not too late to actually emphasize on occupational and vocational streams that are available. Because I made the example about benchmarking with 17 countries where, for example, some of them at grade 3, grade 4, in our context, a child will be channeled to a certain pathway or stream, if you want to put it that way, an occupational stream or vocational stream, a technical stream, an academic stream. And they will be channeled that based on their capabilities. Some may argue is that not too early, right? But at the same time, there's better much, if you compare what the CEO was speaking about now at the end, about, yes, you're creating a citizen for the country, but yes, we can create those personal development skills and knowledge that people require, but they must be able to utilize that to survive. They must be able to utilize that to participate in the economy and various other things that they need to do. So in education, and the NSC must be able to give somebody the tool that they can use to get by in life. Not just being an active citizen or citizen that is that is respectful and all the values that we might carry, but they can be able to utilize to put food on the table. So if the question is grade 8 and 9 not too late, maybe, in relation to the 3-stream curriculum model, which is something that is in discussion, to maybe give learners that opportunity. Should we not be doing it at a bit earlier age, to channel them in those streams? And that's a question maybe that, I would leave with the department. But secondly, DG, you mentioned that technical high schools and technical schools are expensive to kind of build in all of that. But also, it goes back to my point that there's a requirement for collaboration in schools. There's a requirement for us to rethink about how do you finance education? Do we give people vouchers so they can access those schools? Or do we force ourselves to build those schools even though there's a shrinking budget? What financing mechanisms are in place to make sure that this curriculum that we so boast about, CEO, to say that it's the best NSC in the country, when it comes to implementation, it's not hindered. I also come from Tsolo, where I studied in a rural school. I went to Kirsten College and I got there and I thought elite is elite, and I didn't know what the difference is. And it goes back to your point about writing an exam and not understanding. So the question is, do we force people to go to these maybe what we call bad public schools that maybe not have resources, maybe have poor quality teaching for whatever reasons they are? Won't go into the merits and demerits of it, but do we then not have to look at different mechanisms of how do we make sure that this curriculum that we talk about, that we boast so much about, when it is implemented, everybody's able to access it, despite whether you come from Tsolo or Kwagwa, for instance, so that the skills that are required of you for you to attain in that stream that you've chosen, or the knowledge or the personal development skills, that you are able to acquire them and not utilize that. Well, we don't have money to build technical schools, therefore, this curriculum can't be implemented. What other mechanisms are there? And there are solutions on the table. And I think we need to start looking and interrogating them even further so that we ensure that there's access to quality thereof. I want to go to this point that the CEO mentioned at the end about the NSC not just simply preparing people for further education. I use further education deliberately, even in my other discussions, that you'll get a diploma pass and you'll go get a high certificate pass. And just to answer Dr. Polia on where do I get this 13% thing, and it's in relation to what the CEO was speaking about. Realistically, you've got 36.4 people that are getting a bachelor's pass, but only 13% of that 36.4 will be able to access a university based on the APS points or the entry or the requirements that are being put there. Yes, from an NSC perspective, you've got a bachelor's pass, but you can't access a university because there are APS points that are required of you, and there's a misalignment. That's what I was talking. Okay, John, you know, there's a misalignment there, and I'm glad you're saying there are 15 points that, you know, now the DG you've come up with to try and how do you best align that, and hopefully we'll get to see that presentation on whether it does speak to that, and it's in relation to what the chair was raising about the 30% pass. You know, is there a correlation that to say you get a bachelor's pass, there's 36.4% of you, which is not really high at all, in fact, but only 13% of you will be able to access a university because of the requirements of the university, right? And that's what they term as a bachelor's pass to access nursing or medicine, whatever the case may be, whatever you want to go and study. And I'm fortunate because I come from that higher education background myself, chairperson of Umalusi. So I am aware that there is a misalignment, and I've raised it before, and the DG did give an reassurance that there are meetings taking place, but it would be interesting to see whether there is an alignment there, so that we don't give people the false hope that you have bachelor's pass, but you can't access further education if you deem so you want to, you know, pursue a university qualification and so on. So beyond that, CEO, then it goes back to the question I just asked the DG now. Is it not then too late, you know, to redirect people once they've received a diploma pass or a high certificate pass at a matric level, when you could have channeled them to a stream based on the 3-stream curriculum model at an earlier stage, you know, not just at grade 8 and 9, so that they are able to utilize whatever their strengths are as an individual learner to be able to access opportunity at a later stage. And these are the things that we need to be able to answer ourselves, you know, and whether are we not overpopulating the NSC, and knowing that at the end of the tunnel, we're just creating citizens that will sit at home and not, you know, find work or be entrepreneurial or innovative or whatever the case may be. And these are honest conversations that on a day-to-day basis, you know, South Africans have, and also in the education sector, we need to be able to answer those questions, even ourselves. So that when we come up with solutions and do research like this and come up with reports like this, we're able to utilize whatever's good out of it to better the situation on the ground. The second last thing, Chair, is that I like the fact that, you know, Dr. Polio spoke about at length about professional development that teachers, teacher-based assessments and outcomes of learners must be demonstrated. And I think that's the mistake that we make. The mistake that we make is that, I mean, I heard the CEO now speaking that we had provincial exams in the past and so on and so on. This thing of the examination is the be and end of it all of how we best assess an individual learner. And I think it's the mistake that we make at the end of the tunnel. There are various different models that can be used to assess whether is this qualification of use, as the chair was speaking earlier, and the knowledge that is acquired, or the professional development, professional skills acquired, or the personal skills acquired by that individual learner, is it usable for whatever reasons, further studying, or so going to a certain stream, or getting employment and so on. This thing of that the exam is the be and end of it all of how we assess is something that needs to really be rethought, because there are various methods that can be used to assess learners. And also, when you're talking about teacher development or professional development of teachers and qualifications, at this point in time, the system requires the Peter Mokel model, where a teacher has to know basically almost at an FET phase, almost a certain amount of subjects for them to teach, for example, if they're teaching a matric class. And is that the right way of developing the qualifications? Is that the right way of developing teachers, you know? And these are things that maybe missed that side of alignment, your 15 points that you've spoken about with higher education that maybe might find expression there. So those are some of the points that, Chair, I wanted to make. And to say that when we're saying that we must decentralize, it does not necessarily mean that there must not be a national framework. There must be a national framework, there must be guidance in terms of that, but decentralization just speaks to flexibility. CEO does not necessarily speak that we must have different, systems, and because we come from different backgrounds, now we're going to get the different eggs of the basket. It just means flexibility, and I think these are some of the ideas, and I think if we had to workshop some of the, the committee on this, you'll find quite a lot of ideas, even from this end of the oversight table, that can make a contribution to some of the things that, you know, the experts may be dealing with now in terms of the subjects, specific matters that you spoke about, that, you know, you've confidentially distributed. That's all good, you know, but I think also, you know, we've got a voice that we can, you know, we can throw in there and see, you know, if, you know, we can't come up with, you know, with a curriculum that is improved. You know, yes, there's pockets of excellence. We, you know, appreciate that, and that's why I made the point that our education system is not as bad as people, you know, and all of us think it is. It's just a matter of when we do implement it on the ground, does it actually become impactful and achieve the outcomes that we intended it to achieve on all, you know, across the board, including from where I come from as Lali, you know, and you know, they're not having to get an opportunity to go to a certain school for me, you know, to know, you know, how to get by and become a national and global citizen. So those are just the points, Chair, that I would have liked to make. And I really do enjoy the discussion, and I hope that we'll get an opportunity to make comments as the time goes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Honorable Nodata. Can you lower your hand? Okay. Anyone from DPE or Umalusi? Or you have taken his views?
Yeah, Chair, I have nothing to add. Those were very useful comments, and thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, Doc. All right. DPE, I take it we are fine as well. With the comments that he has raised. I must say also, I think many of us have rather seen the presentation today as a lecture. You know, it was rather a lecture, and I'm sitting here, I'm asking myself, how do we introduce this cream that we have here in this meeting to our people at the deep rural areas? How do we disseminate this information so that it doesn't only sit with our heads? Because I think it can't be me alone, but a lot of us has learned a lot today. At a personal level, I have learned a lot. And we keep on learning. But this type of cream that we have, how do we take it down? How can one create colloquiums that would introduce the CEO of Umalusi to someone who's in Colesberg, for instance, you know, to understand what this senior certificate is all about, to understand the work you do, you know, not only to think that you are a CEO of that science certificates alone, but the work behind you, the type of the cream that you have, the presenter of the presentation today, to take those type of, probably it's one of the things that we can have, you know, colloquiums Wednesdays, Education Wednesday. We educate our people, we educate our country on the systems. How are the systems working? You know, it has been made easy now by technology that we can, probably we just need to find out how can we do it? How can we get our people, particularly in the deep rural areas? I must say I'm very much impressed. It was not only a presentation, but it was also an eye-opener on many issues. I was even saying, out of this presentation of today, one can extract a lot of debates you can get. There are a lot of things that you can isolate as individuals and debate as each and individual topic. From what we have discussed today, you know, we have dealt with issues of economy. We have dealt, I always think these issues of foreign nationals coming to our country and be seen as the ones that are giving better mathematics. We need to have that debate. We need to have it there. It's not only me who's saying there is something like that. We've been to schools on the ground doing oversight. We've seen it. You know, where are we losing it? The issue of technical mathematics, the issue of mathematics. Where are our people? Where are our learners? Where are we losing them in the base? But be that as it may, everyone that here is a product of NSC, and everyone that is here is a product of South African education system. So we are people that have been made by this, and proudly so, you know, proudly so. We are people that have been made by this education, and this is who we are. This is what we are, because of the same system. So let me thank everybody. Let me thank you, DG, and your team from DBE. Let me thank Chairperson, our professor, Prof. Balim. Let me thank you, CEO, for being part of the meeting. Let me thank you for giving us the information you have given us from you see, we are dealing with educated people today. We are really in the education sector. We've dealt with experts and the people who understand what they are doing. We are wishing you well. I must say, Umalusi is on the right track. The combination of the chair and the CEO, I don't know whether it's because of, I know Prof at a personal level, but I think with our veteran CEO, we are moving. Thank you very much for this appointment, Team DBE. And all the best till we meet again.
Thank
you, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your
Chairperson.
comments.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, honorable members as well.
I'm not sure if Noltando is now, okay, she is back. Can we have the minutes?
I'm not back as yet, Chair. I've gone through my phone, but I've asked Mrs. Portia to share the minutes on my behalf.
Okay, Mrs. Portia, are you able to assist?
Let me try, Chair.
Okay.
Is it visible?
Mm-hmm. Okay, now you are bringing another format. Oh, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
I was looking and I'm saying, yo, Okay. Members, this is the meeting that we had on the 6th of September in Zoom platform. We had a briefing from the department on their draft rural education policy. And then we considered and adopted the fourth quarterly report, and we considered and adopted the minutes of the 14th and the 28th of June and the 30th of August. Page 1 is attendance. And page 2. And page 3. We have here opened the meeting and welcomed everybody. And the meeting was moved and adopted by Honorable Litsie and seconded by Honorable Adwons. And then we had a presentation from the department on the rural education policy, which was done by Dr. Langa. And then we had a presentation of the rationalization, which was done by Mr. Ndlebe. And those were the discussions from the members. Then the responses were led by the DG. And Ms. Gail. Mr. Ndlebe. And then we've considered the minutes of the 14th of June, the 28th of June, and the 30th of August. And we've also considered and adopted the fourth quarterly report. And then on committee resolutions, we have the resolutions there. We can move to the next page. And then we concluded by thanking everybody, the department, for their participation. And then the meeting agenda at 12:25. Any corrections? Honorable Van Zyl.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good afternoon. Just an inclusion of my attendance. It wasn't recorded under the attendance. Thank you. I was at that meeting last week.
Oh, okay. Yes, on page 1, can we just amend by putting Honorable Van Zyl there as part of the members that attended the meeting? Other than that, any corrections? If there are no corrections, can we adopt the minutes?
Chairperson.
Principal.
My unconspicuous hand is up. I move that we adopt these minutes as a true reflection of what happened that day. Thank you.
Siyabonga, Principal. Any seconder?
Thanks, second.
Thank you very much, Honorable Litsie. Siyabonga. On that note, then, can I thank the members for participation in the meeting and just remind everybody that we've got a plenary at 2 today. And then we are going to meet next week, Tuesday, same time. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you, Nodada, and everybody on the platform.
Record.